Alright, this is some information from our skills-based assessment for routers 223, and what I did was I pulled out some of the configs from some of the students, and the configs, or not the configs, but some of the information from the configs, and like the routing tables and so forth. What we have is we started out here with the main office, which is actually a multi-layered switch, and we created connections to all of the students' routers, which ended up being 18 different student routers. The connection in between here was a 172.18 student number 2 for the students /24, and so this number varied 1 through 18 for the students, and then the interface on the multi-layered switch here was A.1, and so all of the students made this connection, so everybody had connection to this router. This router is running RIP version 1. All of the students were to run RIP version 1, and they were to share their loopbacks. So they were all supposed to create a loopback of 192.168x, same number, dot, and I allowed them to pick whatever they wanted. I meant for them to use the 24, even though some use something else, which still should have worked if it was done appropriately. Alright, so now what your challenge is to explain why some of these routes did not get advertised. Okay? And I should have seen them all in the main office, plus all the other routers should have seen them in their routing tables. But since they didn't put a workstation on, the student may not have noticed that their routes didn't get shared. Okay? If they had done it wrong. So this is a great example. So we're going to move forward. There's 8 pages, so if you're thinking ahead of how long it's going to take to go through, we'll get started. This page right here, this is the router. The routing table for the main office router. Okay? Now you will notice some things. For example, I created these loopbacks directly connected. Okay? We're seeing the routes from some of the other routers. There's 12, there's 15, there's 8, 11, 4, 17, 16, 2, 18, and so forth. All 18 of the students connected. Okay? They all connected. So that worked for the students. This is unusual. There is a default route in the main router, even though the main router is not connected out to an ISP. We were using the loopbacks. To represent an address outside of our regular network. So, first challenge, where'd that come from? Here's a good hint. So you can think about that default gateway. And look where it's pointing. So think about the diagram. Where are we defaulting to? Alright, that's enough hints on that one. Go to the next page. You may want to pause once in a while just to think about it. I'm going to keep moving. So, you will notice a couple things here. all the interfaces are up, and we have all these networks. That makes sense. We didn't have anybody on 19. Here are those loopbacks I showed you earlier. Nothing fancy about that. But make note that the only thing configured in terms of the routing protocol here is this. You got it? Now you want to make note of that later on. One more thing. In the main router there was no static default route configured. Nowhere's in there did we type IP route, quad zeros, so forth. Alright. Here we go. First challenge question. This might be the toughest one. So if you don't get this one right away, you might skip it and move on. I'll give you the information. Student created their loopback. And the 13 was one of them that did not show up. It didn't show up in the routing table above. They put it here in their router RIP. They did a no auto summary. They did not create a default route. I would have listed it if they had an IP, whatever, for the default. Yet, they can ping out to this network. Okay? I'm going to slide down. We're going to look at the routing table. Okay? There's issues. Let me, okay? Here we go. If you notice there at the top, they do have a default route, but they did not type it in. Okay? Alright, so let's take a look here. They have a default route. What's wrong with that? Okay, second problem. This is interesting. This is their loopback, which is right here, up and up. But that address would not show up in anybody else's routing tables. Alright, this is a great example of why is this correct? It's not correct in the sense, but it worked. It's in the routing table. But you look at that address, and you look at this one, and there's a way to explain why that is the way it is. Alright, I'm going to move on. Next page, here we go. Scenario, we have a problem here. Now, if you look at this one's also interesting. I believe the student has a typo. They meant to type 168, but since they didn't, they typed 165. There's no reason in the world that address shouldn't have shown up in all the other routing tables, because they have an address for a loopback. And if we jump down here, the loopback is up. It's up. It's working. Okay? And they have this right here. But it did not share it. It did not work. Okay? There's a couple other things wrong here, like this. I'm not sure what that's for. They did do this. This is good. Okay. They did do that. And then I give you another big hint right down here. Give you another big hint right down here of why it didn't work. Now remember, some information is missing. I did a show IP interface loopback, and it shows the loopbacks are up, gives you some addressing information, and then of course there's a bunch of other information I didn't show. Alright. You should be able to explain why that address didn't show up. Okay. We only got 2 pages left. Okay, here's our next scenario. This one has a couple different interesting things. Here's their loopback that they configured. Okay. Here's their router rip. Here's their Ethernet 0. And here's their default gateway. Okay. Now, I'm going to scroll up a little bit. We have this. Then, let's just scroll down a little bit. I think I can almost squeeze it on. They configured a default route, but did that route go in? Is that from this static one up here? Obviously, I'm asking because it isn't. And doesn't a static override a routing protocol in most cases? Something to think about. Obviously, there's a mistake there. So you can figure it out. Page. Believe it or not, I think a couple of these are way easier to figure out. Alright. This one, their loopback is configured correctly. I noticed it. It showed up in their routing tables and so forth, but it did not show up in the main router or any other student's routing tables. This is total what they have for router rip. You should get that one right away. This one is similar to the one above. You get that one figured out. And so then our last one, right, our last 2 are down here. Okay. Here we go. What happened here? We have this. Looks okay, and I checked. It was up and up. Showed up in their routing table. They were connected to the main router. They did this work. There's more than one thing wrong in here, but I'll tell you, there's a mistake down here that caused this to not show up in anybody else's routing tables. And the last one. Down here, everything worked. This connection was made. These routes showed up in the routing table, but what else is wrong with this? This was student. It was the 18th router, student 18. You can see the 18 right in there. But what else is there's one other thing wrong here. They shouldn't have done. Doesn't really affect a whole lot except it was incorrect. And that is it.